All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another live stream. It's been a little bit since we've had one of these, so we're going to again cover, obviously, World Creator 2021. Okay, so today we're going to run through a few things in kind of a chill format. I'm going to cover the new displacement filter, which is really cool, and some of the settings evolved around that. Most of the updates have primarily been under the hood, and we won't see those directly. It's mostly so that they can have improved the rendering engine to this, as well as doing some things to allow rendering of the water levels under and sort of how it looks under the water too. They've added the depth of field, a few different camera settings, depth of field, which is pretty cool. Um, I think vignette might have been added. I can't quite sure. Yeah, there's not a whole lot what's new except the displacement filter or the Heightmap filter is pretty interesting. So instead of going through the custom base shape filter, right up here, we can now go through the an actual filter to import a height map or any displacement or any texture really that you wanted to kind of use for displacement, because now displacement and tessellation are a thing now, as well as one other. I think there's one other texture that's been included. It might be ambient occlusion. Yeah, I think AO was included as far as a compatible texture on the software. So those, and there's going to be different pipelines for why you would use one over the other with doing a displacement or height map via a filter, or doing either of those textures through the custom base shape. I've not really followed World Creator. Well, that's fine. I mean, if you haven't followed the development, it's not a super fast development thing. They're working as quickly as they can to implement a lot of things in the back end to really help bring the feature set um, from the ground up. Because really, unlike a lot of development, most development with programs like this, they'll just bring it out and not announce anything about what's going on with the progress to it. So, other companies will just post the alpha, wait for feedback, post the beta, wait for feedback, and then post the full thing. Well, these guys, it's kind of like a rolling a rolling beta or a rolling alpha. They'll update it and let all you guys use it as it's going on, and we get to see the progress as it's happening and provide feedback as they're doing it. So I guess that could take a little bit longer, because instead of them making, between the few of them making executive decisions, they're getting all the feedback from the alpha users. So that when you add more feedback, you have to tend to take longer to examine all that feedback. And it's good feedback, don't get me wrong. So the hope was that the full beta and a bunch of features would have been out already by the end of this month, but I don't think that's going to happen because they have a whole lot more left they want to do. But that's just the nature of development. Yeah. So for now, if you're wanting to use a program for actual production work, I'm still using World Creator 2, but you can use World Creator 2021 for different things because they fixed some of the export stuff. Granted, you're limited to 2K by 2K in physical terrain size right here, which hopefully soon we can get it to where the tiling is applied and we can change the size of the different, terrain sizes and stuff, which will be added right here. So to some of the new features, let's cover the displacement or the height map filter. Because it's really cool, but there are some things I wanted to discuss with them on adding that, especially with certain types of projection mapping, and we'll get to that in just a second. World Creator 2 is still fantastic. Yeah, World Creator 2 is still fantastic. It's still my go-to application for producing content for freelance work and stuff. So it's it definitely has still a powerful set if you know what you're doing. Um, so that's pretty handy. So on to displacement. If you want uh, you have to enable displacement before to actually get to see it because it's a pretty hefty little feature. So just go to the lighting tab here, and at the bottom you can see displacement. So you just have to enable or disable it, and you can kind of set those tessellated distances, the quality of it, and how many bounces and stuff. And we can get into that later on. But to start, let's go to the biome setting here, and we're not going to do anything to our terrain here. Let's just go ahead and go to the filter tab right here, add a filter, and the height map is under design. So design and then height map. And if we click on a height map, we can see that down here, we can pick which height map that we want. I know of someone or some people who don't seem to rate it, which really confuses me as it's possible to create just about anything. Yeah, I can understand some people's frustration with timing of things and whatnot. But even with this program, which I'll actually had planned to talk about here in a little bit, is you can create pretty much anything, including things that aren't terrains. And I'm going to cover that here today, to be honest. For example, you can create a kit bash of parts for exporting 3D meshes out to put together in another program. Rocks, cliffs, hills, mountains, just creating a set to be used as a mesh or or textured mesh or textured height map or whatever in Unreal or Unity or Lumberyard or 3ds Max, Maya, Cinema 4D, whatever you want. But it doesn't have to be a terrain. It could just be creating rocks or just cliffs instead of trying to sculpt those in something like ZBrush. Granted, I think vector painting is going to be coming in this at some point. So at some point when you decide that you are happy with a piece and you want to sculpt or add filters or effects onto, like, especially if you're planning on exporting this as an object instead of a height map, you'll be able to sculpt meshes that overlap each other, like arches or caves or tunnels. And add and apply different filters to those geometries, knowing that you couldn't export this as a height map, but you could export this as a physical mesh. We had talked about that for a while, and they're planning on adding it. Don't know when, but they're planning on adding it. I don't need any of the texture material elements as I do that in engine, splat maps, etc. Those. So that's an area that I lack knowledge of. Yeah, so the best thing really when it comes to texturing within World Creator 2 or World Creator 2021, you're primarily, if you're going to use the whole terrain, the entire terrain as a texture, it's best to use that kind of terrain as a background element, like a low quality background mountain or distance, kind of like a very low LOD or a billboard you would do for trees and foliage. You just use this as a mesh in the distance with textures applied to it. So it's less draw calls and calculations needed for that particular object in the distance. If you're going to use the terrain for something really close up, like a play character or something where you're walking on it, then you can either just use the engine that you're going to be putting this in to texture it, which is perfectly fine. Or what I like to do, and what's really handy, especially, take Unreal Engine, for example. If you texture, you can texture even in World Creator 2, with more sophistication than you can in Unreal. And you could just use splat maps or weight maps or heat maps or whatever to guide where that texture is going to be in that program. And if you do that, you can even merge splat maps and whatnot within those applications. But if you use splat maps or weight maps or whatever, exported out of World Creator 2 or World Creator 2021, it's going to be a whole lot less calculations than if you created that material network within Unreal. It's still good to do those things because the materials, the actual materials themselves, you should do within those applications for close-up shots, because you're just not going to get the material fidelity exported out of this program in those programs. Yes, that, and you can do that even in World. I do that a lot with World Creator 2. I'll design the terrain in World Creator 2, export that as a physical mesh, open that insanely dense physical mesh in something like Blender, and do some correcting there if I have to, or render there if I have to. But in most cases, the work that I've done has involved using physical meshes, FBXs or OBJs from World Creator 2. Thanks for nodding in agreement. Okay, so back to this height map or displacement map. I'm going to call this displacement. It really should just be displacement because we're displacing the terrain literally. So we'll go through these settings here after I've added a height map or displacement map. So I'm just going to click on this box here. And I've already navigated to a texture from the Megascans library. And we'll just import this displacement map here. So click on the displacement map. And if you want, you can simply open any texture here that you want. It's just going to convert it to, it's going to convert anything that would be RGB to a black and white image and use that. So if you wanted to test with ambient occlusion or try the normal map, it's just going to convert all of these to black and white. But we're just going to use the displacement map. Click OK. And you see it has popped in exactly fits to our terrain tile here. Later, once we have the multiple tile segments, so once the sort of world tiling comes to play, we'll be able to add a height map to each individual tile if you want. Or if you want this height map tile to be spread across multiple tiles, we can spread it across multiple tiles. There's no limitations. I am an Unreal Engine user, so white maps, splat maps are a godsend. Yes, they are definitely the way to go. So yeah, I'm an Unreal Engine user too. I'm not a pro, but I use it a lot for creating my videos for Quixel and Epic because I do some work for them. And I also use it for ArcViz as well as some landscape fun. I'm definitely not a pro, but I use it just enough to get the work done. And I love Unreal Engine 5. I've commented on Unreal Engine 5 before, so prior to its release. All right, so we have this height map in here, and you'll see that the fall off is really strange. It just snapped itself to the shape of our tile, but that's okay. So if we want to change this fall off, or if we wanted this blend to come to the very edge, we can just adjust the blend size here. So if I lower this all the way down to no blending, you'll see that this displacement has snapped to the edge. Or if I increase the blending, then the amount of blending will come in to the center. So if I crank this all the way up to the top, it's going to be almost like a sphere or a circle of blending. If I start lowering this, the only downfall is it blends based on a square, which I'll get to in just a little bit. So let's blend it about 50%. Okay. And this is really cool because you know how sometimes on terrains, there's these angled striations or angled grooves in mountainsides or certain hills. You get how the terrain, how when the world sort of shifted in plates, the tectonic plate will go on top of another plate. And then in doing so, that's how you get things like volcanoes and primarily mountain ranges. Or with an internal tectonic shift like microplating, they'll do the same thing. They'll crash into each other. One will overlap another, create heat and all that stuff. And then what it'll do is over time, it'll create these striations. Well, hopefully right now we can create these striations now, but we can only create them on sort of a horizontal direction, we can change the angle of them. But I'm hoping with some type of special projection mapping, instead of this height map being applied, from the top down, maybe this height map could be applied to be projection mapped from, the right side to the left side or the left side to the right side, so that it affects, instead of, we can rotate this to whatever angle we want by rotating the rotation slider. But say we wanted to, instead of have it rotating based on the Z axis like it is now, maybe we can rotate this based on the X axis or the Y axis, so that this height map could be projected to the side of a hill or the side of a cliff. I'm really hoping that they can implement that. I haven't talked to them yet about doing that, but I think it'd be really cool, especially with, vector displacement and stuff like that. I just wanted to throw that little nudge in there that I'm hoping that we could do something like that, which would be really nice, because creating those sort of angled looks from the side are really difficult right now. You can do it, but if we can just have an image like this to make those cuts for us from the side, that'd be really cool. All right, so we know that we can rotate this, but you can see it's based off a square, which is what the texture is. I'm hoping we can apply this to many different shapes. If we wanted to make this a sphere, obviously, we just increase the blend range, and the amount of that square kind of goes away. So we've created a sort of alpha mask, or not alpha mask, but sort of like an alpha paintbrush. So a spherical paintbrush, we've kind of created that by just increasing the blend size some, and rotating it is really cool. Let's rotate this back this way. And actually, I don't like how much atmosphere sky is coming through. Let's change that. And let's rotate the sun angle some. That's fine. We'll just work with that for now. All right, so let's rotate this something about right there so that we can see these striations. Now, this displacement, we can't see a whole lot of it yet, but let's lower the level strength on level 8, and let's increase it on 11. Oh, now look at what we got. So we've increased the quality of what the actual height map would be. So 11 is presumably, since this is our, we're based off 1 meter, precision level here at the top, the level 11 will pop up, and this is sort of representing what the actual height map would be, these sort of cuts. And we can probably mess with a little bit of the other levels to kind of boost the overall shape up a little bit. We can increase the height scale. Let's see if we rotate this to get some interesting looks. It's really fast, but you can see how square this still looks. So if I still increase the blend size all the way to the top, so this is a nice circle, that way the blending is just almost perfect between the terrain and what we're doing. All right, so also let's lower the height scale a tab. So another thing that we can do is we can offset the X axis and the Z axis. Well, this should be Y, but X and Y, or Z and Y, are used differently between applications, but they're used to Z being on one of the planes and Y being a vertical plane. We'll be able to change this in the settings panel to whatever Cartesian system that we wanted to use. But what I wanted to point out here was the scaling. So if we lower the scaling, we can make it really small, or we can increase this size to be really big. If we make it really small like this, okay, we can then offset the X and Y axis here, which will move this across the terrain. So if I wanted to move this around, I can move this around anywhere I want on this particular tile. So if you have multiple different height displacements that you wanted to put together, you can then just move them around, change their scaling however you want. And so the scaling makes a big difference on if you can see or not see that sort of squared edge. Let's take this blend size here, crank it all the way to the bottom. And you can see now how I'm just moving this around. It's that perfect square image of that displacement map that we put in. And I'm just moving this around. And it's weird seeing the square, but maybe you can do some interesting stuff with multiple squares and get them together, which we might actually do. But I like the scale to be, let's say, about this. And if I increase the blend size to somewhere about right there, let's increase the height detail. And we can change the overall strength of the whole thing as well, the entire effect. Let's rotate this a bit more and move that. Let's move this to the side like that. Perfect. Insert Z is up. Meme here. Yeah. Z is vertical axis for most programs. X and Y, of course, is the plane. Z is the Y is the vertical axis for programs like I think Unity is that way, and I think there's another 3D. I don't think it's Cinema 4D, and I don't think it's Maya. There's some other modeling program where it's like that. Of course, in Blender you can change the axis, any axis, to whatever you want. And I know in this program they said they're going to allow you to change the axis to whatever you want. They're also going to bring custom key bindings, which would be really cool. Take a sip of coffee there. I would love custom key bindings, and they're planning on bringing that, which would be really nice. Let's see what this looks like. So it's not bad. It gets the idea of what we want. That's pretty darn spiky. So let's increase the blend a little bit more and maybe lower the height range and increase the scaling. There we go. Blender is Y by default. Oh, so in Blender, Y is vertical? Huh. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it because I've always gone through on a brand new Blender install. I've changed the settings to match that of what 3ds Max is. And I know 3ds Max vertical is Z. Or I guess that's true. I have gone in and I've changed a bunch in Blender. Like I change how you rotate around an object. Like I can't wait until we have custom key bindings in this, because for me, see how I'm like moving left and right. I'm just holding down on the middle mouse button, which you can see in the bottom left, says middle mouse. But to rotate around an object, it's right mouse. And a lot of other 3D programs are like that, but personally, because I use Revit and AutoCAD a lot, particularly Revit, I've gotten so used to this motion where I can move, pretty much strafe, or I can pan like this. But if I wanted to rotate around an object, I would prefer to hit Shift and middle mouse button for it to rotate. So I've actually changed that sort of function in Unreal Engine and Blender. I don't like I like using the right mouse button for repeating the last command that I do, or having multiple options open. So yeah, in Blender, I use Shift middle mouse to rotate, and I just use middle mouse to pan. So, all right. So now let's go through And I think this is rotate, orbit, yeah, around a virtual point, projected one. The landscape would be much nicer than the eye can pan as it is. Yeah, I would be nice that, if I have the terrain over here, instead of me clicking haphazardly, like it's rotating based on where the camera position is. But I would love it if, like, especially once objects or the tiled landscape come in, if I select this landscape, I wish I would, I can't wait until it rotates around that selected object instead of just around, the camera's position, which is fine. Maybe there's some times where you want to rotate around this position and you hit a key command where you want to rotate around the object. Yeah, when you're down here, that's where it makes sense. If I can put the sun. If you're down here, using camera rotate in its position makes a lot of sense. But yeah, maybe that's something where we can do, like in my case, if I wanted to rotate, I'll just use shift middle mouse to rotate around the object and just use the right mouse button to rotate around the camera. I can get behind that. You make a really valid point. So in its essence, that's essentially how the Heightmap stuff works for importing a Heightmap on, the Heightmap filter. So now let's see. So again, let's go to texture panel here. And so now you can see we've got displacement and ambient occlusion as two new textures that we can apply to this particular terrain. So let's go ahead and add an albedo. Let's just, for fun, use the same texture that we got that displacement map from. Let's click on albedo here. And it's loaded all those textures with the same except displacement. So we'll add displacement. So it's loaded the displacement. Let's increase its scale so it's really tiny. And let's see. So for each texture, we'll have to also enable displacement. So let's get right in here and see how it happens. Oh, look at that. So I love that. All right. So off, it's just using, forgot the term for it. Anyway, off obviously means there's no displacement. So let's increase the height scale to change the displacement here a little bit more. And you can physically see, let's do a value of 1. Wow. Camera motions are a little funky, but you can see now displacement for this texture is enabled. It's really hefty right now. Let's maybe not do it that much. It really changes the terrain, at least on my camera motions. Maybe that much is fine. Yeah, there we go. This kind of changes the game a little bit with doing this isn't going to benefit you if you're trying to create this solely for exporting somewhere. The displacement, the changing of the terrain isn't going to change the geometry of this terrain. I want y'all to know that. So when if you were to export this as geometry or export this as a height map, what you're going to be exporting is just whatever this is. So I believe that's the way they're doing it. So enabling displacement is only going to benefit, I believe, just within this application. I have to ask that question. I'm not entirely sure. Like if you use displacement I guess it depends. Maybe there's a setting on export where we can say, hey, I want to export texture displacement. That would be really nice, especially with if you export this entire thing as a intended for a background terrain, having the normal map of this texture or having the displacement of all of this be part of it would be really cool, especially for height map use. But I'm not entirely sure at what degree this is going to happen. Oh, let's see. So what resolution is the displacement limited to the precision setting? That is a good question. So we go to, well, for one, the texture size that you import, I don't know. I think the imported texture limitation right now is 8K in this. I know you can create, I think you can import 16K. Is the idea at some point, but right now you can import 8K. With height maps and displacement maps. You can definitely import images that are 32-bit float. But I'm not exactly sure what resolution they've limited those imports for. I know it can do at least 8K because I've imported 8K, but beyond that, I'm not sure because I haven't tested. I don't have a 16K image to test. Being able to bake displacement would be amazing, especially considering UEFI dropping tessellation. Yeah, I don't know why they've dropped tessellation, and well, I do know why they're dropping tessellation to a degree that they are really putting forth a lot of effort into Lumen. But they're bringing something for they're bringing something to the playing field that hasn't come yet for tessellation with the GPU, I believe. I don't know. I'm hoping that there's some talk about keeping tessellation to a degree, but I'm not exactly sure what they're planning on doing. Virtual height fields. Ah, gotcha. I'd be interested. I mean, I'm in the loop of most things, but I'm not exactly. I know of virtual height fields, but I'm not entirely sure what their goal is. As far as the precision setting, let's see. If we go to the lighting tab and go down to displacement here. Displacement, we can change. We can change the displacement or tessellation based on distance. So let's test this out now. So 0 means it's really close, which looks ugly. So if we increase this, you can see it. It's kind of like a sphere away from the camera. So max distance away from the camera. Even if we do 0.1, well, it kind of looks weird up here, doesn't it? Up in the top ridge line here. Let's increase this a little bit more. Somewhere right there is fine. So let's look at the stuff on this ridge over here, this hill isn't being displaced, but the stuff right in our foreground is. So this is obviously going to be huge for, computers that can't do the max of we're just going to tessellate all the way out here. So that's what that is for. All right, so let's go down really close to nothing. All right, so you can see the weirdness here, but let's change the quality. So the quality is probably the sort of, in my terms, the precision of what it's going to be looking for. So let's lower the quality and increase the quality. So increasing the quality definitely boosts those weird effects because the camera, they know that they've got to change the camera sensitivity. And I don't think they've added camera sensitivity yet. Yeah, camera sensitivity is not in there yet because it's super sensitive right now. All right, so if we were to increase the distance, obviously that is going to increase the distance. But let's see if lowering the quality changes a whole lot of what's in the foreground. So quality is maxed out. Lower the quality some. It helps smooth out some of that weirdness in the distance. But not a whole lot has changed here in the front unless we go super low. Let's see, quality low, quality max. So this changes the quality at depending on the distance. So max quality at a distance will require a further range of that scope. Lower quality at a distance blends that in more. Let's go about halfway here. Let's change bounces. Well, there's a lot of bounces. I'm actually let's see here. Honestly, I can't quite see there's probably a special case for this max bounce because I can't see. Let's lower this to be really close. Max distance quality is maxed out. Max bounces, lower, raise, lower, and raise. I have to ask him about what max bounces really is, unless someone has talked to them about it, because I'm not entirely sure. I think for the best bang for your buck right now, let's set this back to the default just to be safe, which is 2. I think for the best quality for performance, let's set the tessellation to be somewhere about this range. So I don't know, maybe 100 meters away. And if we lower the quality, we can blend some of that up a little bit. Actually, let's make max bounces at 0.18. Lower the quality to 0.15. And that's definitely helped a lot. Obviously, close-up shots are going to be, man, that's something. All right, I'm going to press F to go back here. So obviously this texture is wonky. And let's see, one thing about this is we can't rotate it. We can increase its size. One unfortunate thing right now is we can't rotate this image. It's set to this direction. Oh, there was one other thing I forgot to tell you. Let's turn off textures real quick. Which you can see the texture is still, the displacement is still trying to displace that texture. So let's turn off this texture, literally just turn off that texture so it doesn't displace our terrain while we're trying to do this. Okay, so one other thing I meant to showcase was this repeat. If you wanted this to go across the whole terrain, so say for example, we removed this blending. So we can change this to basically repeat. So we can repeat that across the entire terrain. And the blending doesn't matter at this point because we're stretching that across the entire thing. So repeat off, repeat on, and it'll just go across the entire scope, which is really cool to kind of change the name of the game of this entire terrain. So let's add another filter just for fun. Let's add, let's see, canyon. Let's put this one underneath the height map. No, let's make that the aftermath. So, and then let's add, sedimentation complex, but let's make this be limited to a certain height. To about right here. And let's increase the blending. Yeah, about right there. All right, so for the sedimentation, let's change its length. Aha. So I found a bug, which I'll tell them about later. Let's increase this height a little bit. Let's go ahead and add fill. Don't want to do that. Let's see how erosion flow handles itself. Interesting. All right, let's change our precision to a 0.5 meter to get some higher quality. And let's make this repeat. So in doing so, I've found an interesting circumstance. Let's lower this and raise this. It seems like depending on the level strengths that we have here depends on what's being affected for the height map. So it is being affected to a degree. Yeah, it's still working, but it's working. Yeah, it's still a matter of if I want the height map to take rain, we'll just crank that up. But it still looks like it's affecting the height map to a degree. I have to ask that question because I was wanting what I want is like this. So 11 should be maybe this range here. There we go. So now since are having a less effect, we're filling in more of that height map. Yeah. So let's remove this and let's add another sedimentation complex and make sure the length is really low at this point. Ooh, low and general strength around 50%. That's really low. All right. You guys doing okay so far? So this is quite an interesting take on what we intended on doing. Let's do one more. Let's see. Ooh, Crater Cliffs does some interesting things. Ridged. Let's run down. Let's see. Design, effect, rugged. Oh, that's interesting. Distort. Man, inflate's really cool. Really, really interesting. Oh, here's something else. If World Creator 2 or World Creator 2021 is too noisy, especially in Unreal, sometimes you can get some really, spiky, where'd that go? Some spiky effects. If you need to just control that in here, just denoise it a little bit to a certain degree. So let's say a deviation. So here's nothing. And increase a little bit of a deviation. And you can use this exported height map as the height map. But you turn this off to export this part of the terrain as the normal so that you can get all the shading detail of this without the terrain being too dense physically. So that's a good, but you don't want it to be too off because then the shading and the shaping will be a little weird. But that's one trick to use denoise to soften up the entire terrain for exporting as a height map. And then use a really high detailed normal map for the lighting. All right, where was I? Terrace. Terrace needs a big update. Let's do inflate was really interesting, but let's change inflate to only affect a certain, let's do angled 3D. Why not? So angled 3D, let's change the vertical angle to be on this side. Let's see, horizontal angle. Oh, I like that a little bit. That's a bit rocky. And increase our smoothness some. All right, so what we basically did there was we took all the higher peaks and made them rocky, but we've tapered them off a little bit. So this we've seen that our height map here has kind of driven a lot of this terrain. So let's rotate this and see it in high not scaling. Let's see it act in real time. Now, that's pretty cool. Maybe I like the striations to go that direction. I think the lighting's probably a bit too bright in this case. Sun strength. Let's lower the sun down a tad. There we go. Sky strength. Sun angle. Here we go. We can see some things a bit better in this case. Yeah. I have some interesting tips every so often. One thing about the denoise is if you wanted to not do that within this program, I mean, another method was just to take the height map into something like Photoshop and use a Gaussian blur or use a smart blur to kind of specially blur certain contrast areas to kind of soften it up just a tab so that it does the same thing. The denoise is just one way to do that within this application so that you can visually see what the terrain is going to look like. In Photoshop, you're not going to visually see what the terrain's going to look like until you bring it into something like Unreal. But at least with denoise here, you can have some of that visual control. I don't know if Photoshop's 3D application will let you see something like that. Holy smokes. All right. We're not going to do much else to this. Definitely not doing that. See, this is what denoise looks like across the whole board. Smooth ridges. So let's remove that. And just soften. Let's see. Yeah, let's just soften the fat pieces just a little bit. Just the fat blobs. Okay. There we go.